So welcome to this webinar. We'll get started now. This webinar is on 8 things that you might not know in Roland VersaWorks. Just kind of picked out 8 bits and bobs that I think that some people often have questions about or may not know, just sort of 8 of my newish tips and tricks, I guess. But as I said, anybody that has any questions, we'll try and cover those off. If they're not related to the 8 topics that we're going through, just pick the question anyway, and we'll try and answer those at the end. If we miss any of your questions, I'll email you afterwards and get in touch to try and solve those for you as well. But the 8 topics that we're going to be going through are 5 Qs. So when and how to, why and how to use them, costing of your jobs using the job log, duplicating and copies of jobs, printer color match settings, so making sure that your print colors are consistent, ink limits explained, so a quick look at ink limits in profiles, interpolation and expanding bitmap images, trim marks and margin marks, which one do you use and when, and built-in help and online manuals. So those are the 8 topics that I've chosen, but as I said, we can sort of branch off and talk through any other bits as well. So you should be able to see VersaWorks up on your screen, my VersaWorks. So we're going to be mainly focusing on using the RIP and going through some bits and bobs. So just focus on your screen. And as I said, ask any questions as we go through. So first of all, we're going to move through these fairly quickly because we've got 8 things to get through. And I'm sure if it's sunny where you are, you probably want to get outside maybe, or don't want to be sat here for too long anyway. So I'll try and not take too long dwelling or going through in any major depth on any of these bits and bobs. But the first thing we're going to go through is 5 Qs, why and how to use them. So in VersaWorks 6, we have 5 Qs. In the older versions of VersaWorks, we used to have 2 Qs, and it was a common request to have more Qs. So now we have Qs A through E, which are available for any of your devices. So these are shown in the job list here, and you can sort of flick between each of the Qs. And you can also set up default settings for each of the Qs. So the Qs are basically where you import your jobs, and you can set them up with default settings, which is the benefit of having the multiple Qs. Unfortunately, you can't change the name of the Qs. So the Qs are just Q, A, B, C, D, and E. But you can set them up with default settings. So a common use may be, most people don't have more than about 5 different, sorry, somebody was just talking to me through the window there. Most people don't have more than about 5 different materials that they would use consistently. So you can set up each of those Qs for your materials, for example. So you could set up QA for your vinyl, QB for your banner, QC for your heat transfer material, and so on. That's one way of organizing your Qs. Some people use them by, it could be days of the week. You could have a Monday through Friday queue. You could have queues for existing customers and new customers. There's a whole different range that you can configure these yourself. So queue, the way you would set those up is in the queue settings. So if you go to the edit tab in VersaWorks and go to the queue settings, you have your 5 queues listed there. So let's say, for example, I want to set up QB for a new setting. I click on QB, and it'll open up the queue properties window. This looks very similar to your job settings window because it's the same icons on the left-hand side, but any of the changes that you make here will become default for that queue. They will not, however, affect anything that's already in your queue. So when you import jobs into your queue, they take the queue properties. So if we make any changes to the queue, it will only affect future jobs that you're bringing in. So some of the things that you might like to change, for example, some of the things that are default in your queue, the tile spacing, so the gap between your tiles is the default is 4 millimeters. You can make that higher or lower if you wanted to. Under the quality tab, as you said, maybe I was setting up QB for banner, I could change it to banner as a default. Any of these changes that you make, you will be able to change most of them in your job settings, so for individual jobs as well. However, this will just become the default setting, so this will already be applied to your job when you import it into your queue. We could change the print quality settings, so say, for example, I always print at high speed when I'm using my banner, and any of the other details in this window. So I'm going to keep my color management preset as true rich color for my banner printing, for example. If we jump down to this tab, the file format tab, some of these options are grayed out when you're in your job settings, so you would normally change them here in your queue settings. One of those is the EPS margin at the top. So I actually explained this in one of our recent 5 and 5 videos. If you haven't been watching those, jump onto our Facebook or YouTube channels and take a look through those. But the EPS margin, when you save as an EPS, sometimes file information on the border gets lost, so you can add what's called an EPS margin, which basically expands the file format slightly so it definitely gets all the information. This is something that you would have to change in your queue properties, for example. So I'm just going to change this here to 0.3. I'm going to also select the convert spot colors box here as a default, because that's a good option to choose. Some of the other settings, if we go down to this one, the job management tab, some of these options you can only change in your queue settings as well. So we'll talk through this in a little bit more depth now. This is where you can set up your queues to have default input folders on a network. So this is another way of utilizing your queues to your benefit. Often hear that people are sort of running around their business with USB sticks, going from one computer to the other computer. Or they have lots of people who have access to the printer, so they need to have the ability for designers or the boss or whoever to be able to drop files into the queue to be printed. So this is a great way of doing that, using the job management settings in your queue. At the top here it says input folder, and there's always one set up for you on your C drive when you install VersaWorks. But what you can do is use these 3 little dots at the end, and you can select a specific folder on your drive. So say, for example, we've got a shared drive in your business and you're on a network, then you can select that folder on your network, and anybody who drops a file into that queue, it will automatically open into the queue in VersaWorks. So the action, when it goes into that folder, you've got 3 options: do nothing, rip only, or rip and print. Do nothing means that when you drop a file into that folder on your drive, it will also just open up into VersaWorks. So do nothing just means it opens into the queue. You could get the queue to automatically rip data or automatically rip and print as well. So this is a little bit more advanced for your setup, but it can be really useful for people who have certain types of processes. So say, for example, I've got a web shop and I want my web shop to download any images that people upload, save them into a folder, which I specify. That folder will automatically open them into the queue, and it will automatically rip and print them. This means that I could have, say, for example, a 30-meter roll of material on my machine, and I don't have to manually go through and upload and check all the jobs. They just start ripping and printing as they come through my website. So you can set up automated workflows using your queues. So if I did choose rip and print, or even if I just choose do nothing, you can also get VersaWorks to auto rotate the jobs to save on the media. So they'll just load the best orientation for the size of the image. And you can also get VersaWorks to automatically nest jobs by one of or a combination of these settings, by time, paper length, or number of job. Paper just means media length. So I could say that every hour, for example, I want VersaWorks to look in that folder, batch all of the jobs, nest them together, bring them in, and then they'll be ready for me to print if I've set do nothing, or I could set it to rip and print, as we said. Or by paper length, every meter worth of print, or by number of jobs, every 10 jobs, for example. So this is where you can set up automated workflows. A common thing may be if you have an input folder for QA, for example, on a shared drive, that could be called vinyl inputs. QB could be banner inputs, QC could be t-shirt inputs. And that's how you can get people to know what the names of the queues are, but where they're saving folders. Obviously, as I mentioned, you can't actually change the names of the queues, which is a question that's come in there. Somebody asking, why can't we name the queues? I don't know why you can't, but you can't. It's probably, I don't know, something to do with the back end of VersaWorks, how it works. They probably need to have a specific name, but what you can do is name the folder that becomes the input for the queue. And then at least anybody who's saving files into those folders will know what their queue they're going into because you've named the folder accurately. The only thing to note about having hot folders, this is what these are called, hot folders, input folders, is any file that you drop into that folder that's becoming the input folder for that queue, it will leave that folder. So the folder is not a storage location, it's a hot folder. So any file that you drop into that folder will come into VersaWorks, but it will leave the folder. So only save copies of your work into. This is because, as I said, it's a hot folder, so they will leave the location. So always save a copy into the folder, otherwise you might lose your only copy. And if it was a file format that was not recognized by VersaWorks, then it wouldn't work and it would just disappear. So make sure that it's a file format recognized by VersaWorks, JPEG, EPS, TIFF, PDF, and PS. So that's how you can set up your input folders for your queues, and how you can set up any of the other default settings for your queues. There's another option there, rip whilst printing, which means that the job doesn't have to wait until it finishes ripping before it starts printing. So it can be a little bit quicker as well. Click on OK. And now, for example, if I do bring a new job into QB, let's just do that now. Let's bring in this picture. So this is into my new banner queue that I've got here. Oh. VersaWorks, being slow, sod's law. As soon as I start trying to do something, it's going to be slow. Why did that not work? Oh, sorry, add job to QB. Let's just choose something else. Let's choose that. There we go. So that's coming into QB. And if I open it up, we'll see that the default settings already applied to that job are banner and high speed, because I changed those in my queue settings. So that's a quick introduction to 5 queues, why and how to use them. They're not set up in any specific way, but you can configure them to suit your needs the best. It looks like I've had another comment come in. An answer to you, Neil, from one of our staff, just saying the name change function for the queues has been requested to our development team in Japan. So hopefully that's something that we will see down the line. But at the moment, yeah, they're just called queues A through E, and you can access the queue settings just by clicking on that little cog rather than going to the edit queue settings as well. That's another little shortcut for you there. So have a think about your workflow, how's best to organize your queues by function, by day of the week, by media type, by whatever, and you can configure those that way. Any questions on that? That's my quick overview of 5 queues, why and how to use them. I have seen people make use of that the automatic workflow quite well. You know, that it could be that you're out of the office, for example, and you're working on a design with a client, and you've got access to a VPN, so you can work on that design with your client. You know, somebody back at the workshop running the printer, and you log into your VPN, create that design, save it into the folder, and whoever's the printer operator just sees jobs start appearing in their queue. They can just check them and then hit print as well. So quite a useful feature to have there. So there we go, 5 queues and how to use them. Doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in, so we'll move on. Next, costing jobs using the job log. Now, just before this webinar, I just logged in to check everything was working okay for me. And because of the way I've got my screens configured at home here for this webinar, when I go to the view job log, I can't see it. So again, one of those things when you're trying to do a live session, my job log is not visible because of the way I've got these screens configured. It's disappearing onto another screen. Unfortunately, I can't actually show you the job log, but hopefully you guys have seen this feature before. But if you go to the View tab and Job Log, it opens up a window which shows you the jobs that have been brought into VersaWorks. So, and the process of those jobs, or the status of those jobs, sorry. So the job log will say the name of the job, the queue that it was brought into, whether it's been ripped, printed, saved, or deleted or cancelled, for example. So the status of that job, and it also tells you the ink usage for that job. Now, if we just select a job here, as I've just brought in this job, we can probably use this one. It says down the bottom here in this middle window of VersaWorks, ink consumption estimate. So it says 1.01. That's in cc's. That's the metrics that they use for ink. So it says ink consumption estimate. Now, when you bring in a job, VersaWorks will just quickly develop an estimate for how much ink that's going to use. And that will be put here in this ink estimation. I normally advise people not to use this estimation as how much ink it's going to use, because if you go in and make changes to a job, so if we go into this job, for example, and I just make it much bigger, let's say fit to media size, okay, it is going to change the ink estimation. However, it's doing it on the fly, so it's not going to be as accurate as if you do it the other way. So sometimes when you make changes, it doesn't update as accurately as it could. So rather than using this ink estimation down here, if we select a job and we go to rip that job, so you don't actually have to print it, you just have to rip it. So if I click rip on this job, we'll see the ink consumption estimate was 32.33. Let's just make a note of that. So 32.33 cc's. Once you rip a job, VersaWorks will calculate the exact amount of ink droplets that it needs to use to print that job. So once we've ripped a job, it will give us accurate ink consumption, which will be in the job log as well. As I said, unfortunately, I can't show you the job log because of the way I got my screens configured. But if you go into your VersaWorks and look at the job log, it holds, I think it's 200 jobs. So it will hold your latest 200 jobs. As you bring in more jobs, it will delete the bottom ones. In the job log, you can also delete jobs. So you can take them out of the job log if they're no longer, I don't know if you want to delete them because you don't want the data for whatever reason. You can also export the job log as a spreadsheet, as a CSV file, Excel file. So you can take out your data each week, for example, and you could calculate exactly how much ink you've used that week in printing terms. The job log doesn't show you waste ink or anything like that, for example. So in the job log as well, another thing that you can do, if you've got, say, for example, white ink, special colors or anything like that, then it will show you how much ink is being used per job by ink channel as well. So it will show you, if you double click on the job or click on the little blue icon, I think there is, then it will say, you know, how much it's using for the CMYK channels and how much it's using for the other color channels. Say, for example, if you have orange ink in a VG2, or if you have special ink, how much white you're using or how much gloss you're using in a UV device. So that can be quite useful as well. Now that's finished ripping, and it says ink consumption down here, 32.33. So it was the same. Yeah, again, sod's law, as soon as I try to do this, it's gonna work exactly the same, but it does sometimes work out different to the estimation. So it's better to rip the job if you can to get a more accurate representation. So once you've got your ink consumption, so I've ripped this job, it's telling me it's going to use 32.33 cc's of ink. So what does that mean in terms of costs? Now, VersaWorks doesn't actually calculate the cost for you because inks cost different amounts. You know, people are using different inks from different, slightly different configurations and in different regions and all the rest of it. So it doesn't actually tell you the cost. It just tells you how much ink it's going to use. So what you can do is you could generate a quick spreadsheet. So can you guys see the spreadsheet on the screen now? Just checking, hopefully you can. Just double check. You should be able to see an Excel document that I've just popped up there. So this is one I just created this morning. So what I've done is I've put in the ink cartridge size. So I'm using a VG2 here. So the ink cartridges come in 500 cc bags. I put in the price of those bags. So I've just put the default price from the Roland website, which is $87.99 for a 500 cc bag. And then I've worked out the price per cc. So that will be the cost divided by the amount of ink. So $87.99 divided by 500 cc's tells you how much it is per cc. I've then just rounded that up to the nearest number. And then all I've done here is, as you can see in the formula at the top there, I've just created a quick little formula saying, this was from a job I created earlier, just to show you that it used 15.46 cc's of ink times the price per cc means, oops, that it's going to cost me £2.72 in ink to print that job. So we could update this. So the job that we used there was, what did we say, 32.33 cc's, and that's just updated for me there. So that's going to cost me £5.69 in ink. Oh, sorry, somebody's just saying in the chat there that you're not seeing my That's annoying. My oh, let me just see if I can redo this. 2 secs. Can you now see? Sorry, just updating my windows here. It doesn't look like it's showing you my Excel document for some reason. Bear with me a moment. Oh, there we go. Got it now. Brilliant. So there we go. Sorry, I'll just re-explain that quickly. So ink usage, ink cartridge size, price per bag, price per cc. So the price per cc is the price per bag divided by the number of cc's. And the cost of ink is the price per cc times the amount of cc's times the price, which means this one was going to be £5.69 in ink. Looks like there's a slight lag. It could be as I'm working from home, it could be my internet. Whenever you're doing live demos, there is a slight lag, so I'll try and slow down a little bit there. Some of you coming in the chat there saying that. So you can create a quick spreadsheet like this for yourself, and then every time you export from the job log, you could get it to automatically calculate the ink prices for you. Obviously, depending on the ink type that you're using and the cartridge size you're using, you might want to change the ink cartridge or bag size, and then the price that you pay for your inks as well, to work out the price per cc and then the job, just to times these together. Just going to have a quick catch up on the comments here, just to see if there's anything that I missed, as it's only me working from home on this webinar. I haven't got anybody checking the comments for myself, so okay, just bear with me a minute. Just to show you quickly, bear with me. One of our colleagues has just emailed me a screenshot of the job log, just to show you what that looks like. So yeah, sorry, I did try to get this all ready this morning, but it wasn't working. So just bear with me just a moment, and I'll see if I can show you that. And then just people saying that there's a slight lag on the the screen I was sharing with you. So does everybody use the job logs? Anybody use this for costing jobs? Oh, I tell you what, just because there is a slight lag here, I'm just going to turn off my webcam. That might make it a little bit quicker for you as well, but you should be able to still see the screen, okay? So bear with me a moment. Okay, can you guys now, let's just have a quick look. You guys should be able to see a job log come up on the screen now. So I've just been sent this. So let's just close this window a moment. Sorry, I'm doing this one on the fly a bit here. So you guys should be able to see an example of what the job log might look like. And when you're in the job log, where it says ink consumption, some of the columns may be missing, and that's because you haven't ripped that job yet. So as soon as you've ripped a job, then the ink consumption column will be filled out. It says print cancelled, print start, print end, print error, whatever that might be for the process that you're using. So that's what the job log looks like, and there is an option to save it and to get more information on each of the jobs as well. Hopefully you guys can see that. As I said, it's a little bit slow at this end here, so I'm getting a little bit of lag, but hopefully you guys can see that. And there, Chris saying that, yes, you have used it in the past. It's a useful tool just for knowing how much ink you're going to use. You can calculate the cost of jobs here before you print them. So if somebody is asking for, you know, how much is it going to cost to print a certain job, you can put it into VersaWorks, get the ink cost. You could in your spreadsheet also, oh, somebody's saying they can't see the job log. Oh, having one of those days. How about now? Hopefully you can see it. Then you could put in other columns for your other costs as well, for example. So hopefully, oh, no, still not working. Sorry guys, trying to do too many things at once here, I think. Let me just close a couple of windows, that might help. Let's do that. Just bear with me. Well, if you're not sure, go and jump into your VersaWorks and take a look. Seems slow. I've turned off my webcam, so it should be quicker, but not sure why this is. I'm having some issues with my signal, it looks like. What I'll do is I'll just jump back into VersaWorks, and we'll see if we can move on with the rest of the other bits. So look. So okay, let's take a quick look. So hopefully you should be able to see VersaWorks now up on the screen. Let's give it a minute just to catch back up. But any questions about using the job log for costing your jobs? Oh, job log just appeared. There we go. Yeah, we have got a bit of a delay then. Normally the webinar delay is not quite as bad as it seems to be behaving today. Hopefully this will just jump back up to VersaWorks now. Let's have a quick look. So if somebody could let me know if you can see VersaWorks jumping back up onto the screen now, that would be great. I'm gonna have a sip of tea. All right, so should be able to see VersaWorks again now, hopefully. I've just got VersaWorks back up on the screen, and the next thing we're going to talk through is duplicating jobs and job copies. Brilliant. So you've got VersaWorks back on. Sorry about this, guys. So duplicating jobs. When you have a job in your queue, one of the newish functions is the ability to duplicate it. So rather than having to import multiples of jobs, you can select a job. Let's select one. That doesn't really matter. Yeah, let's just clear the settings on this little picture of a monster here. And if I right click on the job, you've got the option to duplicate. So it could be that, say, for example, I have had an order for this job, but I want to create a batch of different stickers for this job. So this is a print and cut job. I can see by the little A icon here. And if I right click on the job and go duplicate job and just call this one, I'll just leave it with the default copy name, or I could change it. So we could say this is going to be monster small, for example. I could right click and duplicate again, duplicate job, and we'll call this one monster large. Okay, so I've got 3 copies now of the same job in VersaWorks without having to re-import those. If I now selected these, for example, actually, if I go into one, so let's go into the small monster. Let's open up the settings for this one, and let's make this into a small sticker. So let's make this 50% of its original size and say we want 10 of these. Okay, now we're going to go into the large version of it. And this one, we're going to make it 200%, so it's a bit bigger, and we're going to say we want 3 copies of that. And then we've got the original one as well. And now if I use my control key and select these different jobs and nest them together, for example, and open up my nest, I've now got the ability to have my 3 different sizes within one job. So that's one way that you could use your duplicating of jobs. So as you can see, this is my 10 small copies, my 3 big copies, and my 1 original copy. We could then change the configuration and have more or less of each. And of course, change the configuration of these as well. So that's one way that you may want to use your duplication of jobs. The other reason might be if you've got a job, for example, that has white ink in it, for example, and I want to print white only, then I want to return to the origin, and then I want to print white and CMYK again. Now that would mean that I would have 2 layers of white underneath my CMYK. So what I could do is bring in the job that has white data within it, duplicate the job, print 1 white only, and print 1 white and CMYK. So it just means that I don't have to export multiple jobs with different settings from my design package. I can just bring in all of the data in one, duplicate it, and then send that one after the other by duplicating the jobs. So that's how you duplicate within VersaWorks. That's literally creating a copy of that file. The other way is something called copies. So if I open up a job, let's just open up this one, for example, and I choose the number of copies. So in here, down here, it says copies, and I've put 4 in the number of copies. In VersaWorks, you are limited to 250 copies here because VersaWorks generates a live preview. And you know, if you had thousands and thousands of copies, it would just make your run really slow. So we're limited to 250 copies there. However, if I wanted to print batches of these jobs, or I wanted to print more than 250, I could put in a number here. So I'm going to put in 25, for example. Let's put in 30, just because it's going to be even on my rows. Center on the media and press OK. What I could then do is hit print. Just let that update a minute, and up pops this window where it says advanced print settings. This is a newer function for VersaWorks 6, and it says print count. So I could now start sending multiples of those 30 jobs. So this would be a workaround if you did want to print, more than 250 stickers. You can set 250 copies and then just choose to print multiples of those 250. So this is a newish feature, and it just pops up as soon as you hit print, and then you can click print. At the moment, I'm not going to hit print because I don't have a printer connected because I'm sat at home. So this is a newish feature, and it means that you can duplicate copies of jobs, but it also means that they're batched into smaller numbers. Sorry, Lewis just saying really hard, big lag now. Okay, let me just see. I'm just going to see if I can. I don't think I have any other windows open that are using the internet, but I will just try and close anything off, and hopefully it will speed up a little bit. Bear with me 1 minute. All right. Okay, I'm going to try and go slow and just open up the windows and see if I can just open up one at a time and see if that helps at all, and just go a little bit more slowly. Don't normally get this much of a lag, but it looks like my internet's playing havoc with me today, so we'll try and just go a little bit slower as I'm going through. So on the screen at the moment, it should just be a blank version of VersaWorks, and let's just so I'm just checking some of my settings here to see if I can change some of this, see if I can get it working a little bit better or not. So the next thing we were going to talk through is printer color match settings, which is it actually has two functions. So I'm going to go slowly on the screen, so hopefully this will catch up, and I'll just talk through the settings a little bit more for you. So if you go to the Edit tab in VersaWorks at the top, there is an option there that says Printer Color Match Settings. And if we select that, a new window will pop up on the screen, which is the printer color match settings for the device that you have chosen in VersaWorks. Now, there's two ways that you can use the printer color match settings. There's one way is for when you have a single device and you want to check the consistency of the color over time, for example. So if you do have printers obviously change over time, your print head may be deteriorating over a number of years, color might shift because of a change in I don't know, it could be the ink or whatever it might be. So what you can do is when you first get your machine, you can take a reference printer data. So the way that this works is you'd have to have something called a spectrophotometer, which is a color reading device. Now, if you don't have one of those, it could be that you could speak to your dealer, your Roland supplier. They might have one. They might be able to help you out, or you might be able to speak to Roland Care and see if they could help. But what they would do is print out a color chart effectively at the beginning of when you first get your machine, and they would then read that color chart, and that becomes the reference data for your printer. They then input that into VersaWorks as the reference. What you can then do is over time, you can reprint that chart, reread the data, and then swap back in the initial data that you had. So it's basically like recalibrating your printer's color output back to what it was at the start. So you create a reference data and you measure that chart, and then you can re-input that reference data at periods of time down the line. So that's one way of sort of reconfiguring the color settings of the device, if you will. It's kind of re-putting in the reference print data there. The other way of using the color match settings is if you have multiple devices that are the same. So say, for example, in my setup here, I've got a VG2640, which is configured with orange ink, I think, rather than the white ink. So if I had 3 VG2640s, I could actually take the print reference data from one of them, and I could put that into the other two's reference data. This would mean that they are all using the same color reference data, and in theory, you get the best color output or the same color output across your multiple devices. Now, this only works for the same devices. So it wouldn't work for different ink formulations, for example, because you're effectively just taking one set of data and applying it to the others that use the same configuration. So that's another way that you can use this printer color match settings. We won't go through in detail how this is done because I don't have a spectrophotometer at home, but that's how it works. So any questions on the printer color match settings and how that would work? Doesn't seem that anybody's asked any questions yet about how that works, but that's called printer color match settings. Sorry, I can just about see now that, sorry, my little visual of what you guys can see is updating, and there is a bit of a lag, so we'll go nice and slowly on the screen here for you. So the next thing that we're going to take a quick look at is ink limits. Ink limits explained. So in order to check ink limits or anything to do with a profile in VersaWorks, you go to the Media tab. The Media tab and to Media Explorer, which is at the top there. So it will open up a window which is where all of your profiles are kept. So whenever you buy a Roland device, you will have a default set of profiles that will come with that device. And it depends on your device and your configuration as to what those default ones are. As you can see here, I've got a VG2640, as we said, with the orange configuration. So I've got generic vinyl 1, generic vinyl 2, generic banner 1, generic banner 2, generic paper, generic backlit, and generic heat transfer sheet. You can also import new profiles, which you can download from the Roland Profile Center or sometimes from your media manufacturers as well. You can also create profiles yourself, but that's a bit more of an advanced process. And again, you would need a spectrophotometer and some software to be able to build a profile. But one thing that we can do is check ink limits, which is quite an easy thing to do. So if we select one of our profiles in the Media Explorer, in the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a little window that gives you a bit of information about that profile. So the information we have is the total number of passes, the dot type that is used, the dot size, the separation control, and then we've got two parts of our ink limit. We've got the single color ink limits and the total ink limit. So the total ink limit is the complete combination ink limits that material has been calibrated to or can take. So with different materials, they'll be able to sort of absorb or take a certain amount of ink depending on the coating, the quality of the material, and that kind of stuff, so the face film. And when creating a profile, whoever's creating that profile will try different ink limits and they'll calibrate it to the best combination. So if we look at generic vinyl 1 here for my VG2640, it says the total ink limit is 200%. That means that that's the total amount of ink that profile will allow to be put down onto that material. So if, for example, in my design, I'm using lots of 100% of colors, 100% red, 100% cyan, 100% black, whatever it might be, or combinations of colors, the most ink that it will ever put down is 200%. And then we've got something called the single color ink limits. So when somebody's creating a profile, what they will do is print out color charts that go from 0 to 100%. And what often happens in those, let me just have a quick look here, see if I can show you, 2 seconds. If I open up the settings for these profiles, it will print a chart that looks a little bit like this. We'll just wait for that to catch up on your screens. It will print a chart that goes from 0 to 100% ink, and then they'll use a color reading device to read that gradient. And what sometimes happens is when they get up near the 100% limits, sometimes the ink reaches 100% color before it reaches 100% ink. So say, for example, it says when it puts down 80% ink, it actually looks exactly the same as if you put down 100% ink. So you're not gaining any color depth by adding that extra ink. So what they do then is they limit those single channels to that percentage, so that you say in this, as we can see in generic vinyl 1, the cyan channel has been limited to 80% ink. This means if I print 100% cyan, my printer will actually only print 80% cyan, because that looks like 100%. So I hope that makes sense. It's a bit hard to explain when I don't have the webcam on and I'm just talking on the screen, but this means that those single color channels are reducing the amount of ink that needs to be put down on that material. So that's sort of saving you on ink, saving you money, but it also means that it's putting down the correct amount of ink for that material. So that is a little bit of an introduction to the single color limits and the total limit. The total limit, if we had, in theory, if you've got you're using the CMYK channels, you could put 400% ink down, but we limit that because most profiles or most materials won't be able to take that much ink. And then the single color limit is breaking down those channels so that we don't put down too much of any one unnecessarily. So if you are wondering, for example, what the difference between generic vinyl 1 and generic vinyl 2 is, if we have a look in the Media Explorer for the VG2640, generic vinyl 2 has a 240% ink limit, but it has slightly lower single color limits. So they're just configured in different ways for different materials. And if you download a media profile specifically for the material that you're using, the ink limit will be set perfectly for that material, and the same with the single color limit. So it will probably give you a better output than the generics would. So that's a quick overview of ink limits for you. And I'll just jump into the questions here to see if we can answer any of these. One question that's come in, does color limits reflect back to ink estimation you showed us earlier? Yes. So if I chose a different profile and then I re-ripped that job, I may get a different ink estimation or a different ink reading for that job. So when you rip a job, it uses the profile information and the ink limits to calculate how much ink it's going to use. So if I change the profile to a different profile and re-ripped that job, then yes, it may use less or more ink. So it's worth having a look at this. If you're perhaps not used to looking through the different profiles, you could try generic vinyl 1 and generic vinyl 2 for a job and see how much ink that's going to use. Sometimes certain materials will lend themselves better to more ink. You'll get better depth of color, for example, when they can handle more ink. Normally, higher quality materials will be able to take more ink. It's not so much down to the thickness of the material, but it's down to the quality and the coating on those materials. Another question that came in, just bear with me a moment, just going to read this one. So there's a question about the color match settings, the printer color match settings, saying, instead of re-inputting the printer's color reference data at the start, can you not calibrate Roland machines to a color standard, say Fogger 39? We're going to be getting into a little bit more depth with profiling. Yes, you can calibrate to certain, you can calibrate your profiles to certain standards. But you want to, this is talking about calibrating the machine to its default settings so that over time with deterioration or change in parts or whatever it might be, say you had to change a print head, if you've got a multiple print head machine, you're just recalibrating it back to your default standards so that over time you're still getting the same output from your machine. When it comes to calibrating profiles or your machine to a certain color standard, yes, I think in theory, but the color match settings are slightly different to calibrating it to a standard. I hope that makes sense. We'll probably have to try and jump onto another webinar to go through maybe color match settings in more depth when we're allowed back in the office and go back on a machine to talk through that slightly more advanced settings that you're asking for there. So that's a quick look at ink limits explained. Now we're going to jump in and have a quick look at interpolation. And what does that mean? So this is just a common question that I might get asked when you're in your quality settings of a job. So I'm going to just clear the settings on this file here and open up the settings. Again, I'll just move slowly because I know that there's a little bit of a lag with the screen here. So in a second, hopefully you'll be able to see the job settings, and I've got a little picture of some sky and some grass at the bottom. And I've brought this into my job set, my queue, sorry, and I've opened it up. And the default size for this image is 250 millimeters roughly by 150 millimeters. And it's a bitmap image. So bitmap images are JPEGs, TIFFs, bitmaps, anything that's made up of pixels. So this file is a bitmap image. It's not a photograph, but it is a bitmap image. It's not a vector-based image, and I'm going to be expanding it in VersaWorks. So if we go down to the quality settings in VersaWorks, there's a little gray box sort of outlining the details area, and in there we've got something called interpolation, the middle option. And there's three options for what interpolation does. We've got nearest neighbor, bilinear, and bicubic as the different options available to us. So interpolation is a way of expanding bitmap images in VersaWorks. So normally you would use interpolation in your design software. So whichever design package you're using, it will have interpolation built into it. But you can also do it in VersaWorks as a quick fix. Normally, it's better to use your design package for working on graphic data because that's what they're there for. But you can do certain bits in VersaWorks as well. So the three different options that we have. So let's just take this image, sorry, and I'm going to expand it first of all. So I'm going to expand this image, let's say 300%. Now let's go 400%, just to make it a nice round number. So I'm making this image 4 times bigger than it was originally. What that means in graphic data is that the pixels that I've used are now 4 times bigger. So in effect, all I've got is bigger squares of pixels than I had before, meaning that if, depending on the resolution of the image, those squares will look bigger and I might be able to see them more, meaning that it looks more pixelated. Interpolation is how a graphics package or a RIP does that expansion of your pixels. And the three options are nearest neighbor, bilinear, and bicubic. So nearest neighbor is the most basic format, and it requires the least amount of processing time of these different algorithms that are available, because it only considers one pixel in the expansion. So the closest one to the interpolated point. This is sounding a little bit confusing. It's probably easier if I'll show you a graphic in a minute that explains this a little bit better. But what it does is make each pixel bigger. With bilinear, it considers the 2 by 2 nearest known pixels to each pixel whilst expanding them. So in effect, what it does is it looks at the nearest pixels and it adds in extra pixels to smooth the gradient between the rebuild of the new pixels. So it results in smoother looking images than nearest neighbor. The final option is bicubic, and bicubic goes one step further than bilinear by considering the closest 4 by 4 neighborhood of known pixels. So a total of 16 pixels surrounding every one pixel, and then it adds new pixels to those. So let me just see if I can open up a PDF on the screen here, which hopefully you can see. Let me just try and refresh my screen. Just a moment. Hopefully you can see an image on the screen here which says interpolation, and it's got 3 pictures of squares. So the left-hand side one would be nearest neighbor, the middle one would be bilinear, and the one on the right-hand side would be bicubic. So for every pixel, it looks at surrounding pixels and adds in new pixels across the bridge between those. This is a kind of visual representation of what's happening. So if we are expanding an image, then we want to add more pixels. The best option is going to be bicubic. And the default option is normally nearest neighbor. However, if I was expanding this image in my graphics package, it's likely that my graphics package would do this for me. So it's only if I'm doing this in VersaWorks. It will take much longer to rip because it has to recalculate all that information. So bicubic on a high-res image being expanded considerably might take a lot longer to rip. But that's what interpolation means and what it does. So as I expanded this image 4 times in VersaWorks, I'm going to add bicubic interpolation to the expansion. Hope that all makes sense. Let's just quickly jump back into the questions box and we'll see if anybody has come up with any questions. No, No questions coming in about that yet. So hopefully that made sense about the interpolation. And we'll quickly jump on to trim marks and margin marks. So let's see if I can grab a job here. I think I've got, yeah, here we go. I've got the Roland Academy logo, and I'm just going to clear any settings that I have attached to that. And I'm going to open this up into the job settings. Now this file, as you can see on the window here, I'll just wait for your screens to catch up, has a white border around it, meaning that when I print it, I don't know where the edge of the image is. So this is a good example of where I might want to apply some marks to my job. When we go to the Marks tab in VersaWorks, we've got 3 different options. We've got trim marks, margin marks, and something called Fotoba cutline marks. Fotoba cutline marks are for a Fotoba device. This is a specific XY cutting device. That it's a manufacturer. They chop your prints into the X and Y axes, and you can apply the cut lines that those machines use. So that's what a Fotoba cutline mark is. If you're not sure what they are, jump onto YouTube or something and pop in a Fotoba cutter, and it will show you an example of one of those devices. The most common ones are trim marks and margin marks. If I apply trim marks to this file, I'm just going to zoom in a bit. Zoom in one more time here, and we'll just wait for your screens to catch up. Let's zoom out a tiny bit actually. If I zoom into the corner of this artwork, there we go, and just wait for your screens to catch up. You'll see that in the corner of my artwork, it's put 2 small lines which face outwards at right angles to the corner. So down here in the corner, there's 2 black lines, and if I just highlight the job, you can see the blue bounding box that's put outside of the trim marks. Trim marks are used for trimming your work, meaning that if I put a ruler across the edge and I use my blade and I run it across, I need to stop at the intersection point of the corner and then realign the next cut. If I used a guillotine and I chop all the way across one edge using trim marks, I actually cut off one of the trim marks, which means I won't be able to line up the next cut because I won't have the next cut available. So what I would normally choose in this example, instead of using trim marks, is margin marks. If I change this to margin marks, what you should be able to see in your preview is that the corner angle now faces inwards at right angles. This means that if I use a guillotine and I chop all the way across the bottom of my trim mark, my margin mark, sorry, I will still have the other line available to line up the next cut. Hopefully this makes sense. Again, it's not the easiest to describe this one. I don't have my webcam available, and we're not sort of physically showing you on a printout. So margin marks are normally a better solution when you are using a guillotine to chop around outside of your design, because these corner marks face inwards. It means that you still have the remaining marks each time you chop off one of the edges. You can also add a border to your margin marks. So you could specify in the horizontal and vertical axes a border. So you could allow, for example, a 20 millimeter white border to your design before the trim marks are applied. Or you could just add a couple of millimeters so that you've got a little bit of space to line up and chop off the actual marks. Hopefully that made sense about the marks. So that was just a quick one looking at the difference between trim marks and margin marks. And we'll just jump on and see if there's any questions. So can you use trim marks when creating a banner to help manually cut off the excess? Yes, of course you can. But this is what I said, I would probably use margin marks rather than trim marks. The trim marks face inwards. It just means that when you guillotine across, you lose those marks. So it's probably better to use margin marks rather than trim marks because they face inwards. If you do have a really large file as well, let's just see if I can show you this here or not. It will also put a mark in the middle. So I can't remember how often it is. It might be every 500 millimeters or something like that. It won't just put them in the very corners. It will also put marks along any long straight edges so that you can line those up whilst you're cutting as well. So yes, when you're creating a banner, to manually cut off the excess, I would use margin marks. They're the better solution. Another comment that's come in here. Could you request from the dev team in Japan the option to change the margin mark line weight? We could request that, yes. It may even have been requested before. It just has a default weight, as you've noticed. So what I might do as a workaround in the meantime from that comment is to put an offset of 1 millimeter. So where you have your margin marks, if I then go to the horizontal and vertical offset, if I put a horizontal and vertical offset of 1 millimeter, it will move those margin marks 1 millimeter outside, and then just make sure that you cut inside the margin marks, which means by 1 millimeter you would lose the margin marks. So I hope that makes sense. That's what I would do if you know, just to push them outside a tiny bit, and then just make sure whilst you're cutting that you trim to the inside of those margin marks. And another question that's come in, let me just quickly read this, about ink limits. They are based on the maximum possible output of the printhead for each nozzle, correct? So when the limit is, say, 80% for a color, it scales all software input back as if the 80% is the new 100%. We get some files, sorry, just reading this question. We get some files that put so much ink that almost runs off the page. I have no idea what the difference is about these files. Is this some kind of embedded profile in the graphic? Cool. Okay, I might get back to you afterwards, Geoffrey, with this comment. Oh, Godfrey, sorry. Just because it looks like it's a little bit more in depth, and we're sort of getting on to more than just ink limits here. But the question is about whether input profiles of designs will affect that output. The ink limits will be the overall ink limit structure for your printer, meaning it won't print more than that. Normally, images will also have input profiles which determine how the color is inputted into your RIP, and then the RIP will either use that information or not, depending on the color management settings that you're using. I don't know if Godfrey, if you did check out another webinar that we did a week or two ago on color management. It's available on our webinars on demand section of our website, so it might be worth checking that out. We did cover a bit more about input and output profiles and things in there. So we did cover off this in a bit more depth. So maybe worth checking that out. If not, I'll get back to you afterwards, as we're sort of running out of time and I don't want to spend forever talking about the ink limits part, but thanks for the comment. I'll try and get back to you if that's okay. And then finally, one other thing that people might not know is there's some built-in help and online manuals to VersaWorks. So if we go to the help tab at the end, at the top it says show help. And if I click on that option, I'm just going to see if I can open that up on the screen for you. There's a new-ish website that comes up. So I'm just checking to see if you guys can see this. It used to be a sort of process tree website that came up, and they've changed it to this newer one where it has a breakdown of all of the different options in VersaWorks. Just trying to see if I can refresh my screen a minute. See if you guys can see that. But it's got a search box, it's got basic knowledge of VersaWorks, basic operations, output settings, cutting, managing media information, all sorts built into VersaWorks now. So if you're unsure about any of the features or you want to look at any of them, you can hover over any of these items and read up on the best processes or what those functions mean within VersaWorks. So this is quite useful for anybody new to VersaWorks or guys looking for a bit more information from Japan about what happens within VersaWorks. So that's just a built-in help section. And there's also a new part where it says manual library. So all of our manuals for our devices are now available online. So if you click on the manual library, it'll take you to webmanual.rolandgg.com, and you can search for your device and you can look at the manual online rather than having to go digging through a box to look for your original manual. So another handy feature. Pretty much all of the information that we've gone through today, that we go through on a lot of courses and things, is available in your manual. It's just not lots of people read their manuals. So yeah, if you want a bit of nighttime reading, always worth going and having a look at the manual library as well.